Forget what you were taught about the New World. Long before the pyramids, before the first empires, a continent lay silent, waiting. This is the story of a lost, drowned landmass, a world of 2-mile-high ice sheets and a planet ruled by giants. It's the epic of the paleo pioneers, families who hunted mammoths for survival and confronted saber-toothed cats. How did they get here? Did they walk through an ice-free corridor, or paddle down a mysterious kelp highway now lost to the sea? We are about to unravel the 15,000-year-old controversy, a genetic mystery, and the real foundational story of the Americas. This is the Ice Age Odyssey, peopling a continent. A world of ice, the planet before the first Americans. Imagine a world you cannot recognize. A planet that, from the silent vantage of space, looks wounded, scarred by an impossible white expanse. This is Earth, not as we know it, but as it was 17,000 years ago, around 15,000 BCE. It is a planet in the grip of a profound chill, a deep, rhythmic glacial pulse that has dictated the terms of life for nearly 100,000 years. This is the late Pleistocene, an epoch of giants, of landscapes now drowned, and of a climate so severe it sculpted the very bones of the world. And in this world, 2 entire continents, a new world, lay silent, untouched by human hands, waiting. The dominant feature of this planet is ice. Not the familiar ice of a winter pond or a mountain glacier, but a force of geology. In the north, much of North America is buried. 2 colossal ice sheets, geological titans, hold the continent hostage. The largest, the Laurentide ice sheet, is a continental monster. It sprawls from the Atlantic coast across the heartland, covering all of what would one day be New England, New York, and the Great Lakes. Its frozen lobes push south, reaching the Ohio and Missouri River valleys. This is not a sheet of ice. It is a range of frozen mountains, a plateau of compacted snow and ancient air that is, in places, 2 miles thick. Its weight is so immense that it depresses the Earth's crust, pushing the land itself down into the mantle. To its west, a second, separate entity, the Cordilleran ice sheet, suffocates the Rocky Mountains. It smothers everything from the Alaskan Panhandle down through British Columbia and into Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. It is another frozen sea, filling mountain valleys to their brims, carving peaks into sharp horns, and gouging the U-shaped valleys we would one day call fjords. These 2 ice sheets are a near impenetrable wall. At times they meet and fuse, creating a single unbroken barrier of ice thousands of miles long. At other, slightly warmer intervals, they may pull apart, revealing a narrow, treacherous corridor between them. A long, dark alley of gravel, ice-dammed lakes, and screaming winds. But for millennia, this frozen barrier is the great keep-out sign of the Northern Hemisphere. It is the reason North America, from this point south, is an island, isolated from the rest of the world. This global deep freeze has a profound consequence. The planet's water is not in the oceans. It is locked away in these colossal ice sheets, and in their cousins across the Atlantic and Scandinavia. With so much water held in solid form, the sea levels of the world have plummeted. The oceans have retreated, falling more than 400 feet, 120 meters below their present levels. This is not a minor change. It fundamentally redraws the map of the world. The coastlines we know are gone, replaced by vast new coastal plains. The British Isles are not islands, but a frozen northwestern peninsula of Europe, connected by a sweep of tundra and marshland called Doggerland. Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea are fused into a single, massive continent called Sahel. Siberia and Alaska, now separated by the Bering Strait, are united. This connection is not a narrow bridge. It is a vast, new subcontinent, a landmass 1,000 miles wide called Beringia. This is the stage, the single most important piece of geography in our story. But Beringia is not the frozen wasteland one might imagine, because the weather patterns are so different. This region is paradoxically drier. The sheer size of the ice sheets to the east blocks moisture from the Pacific. This creates a polar desert, a vast, cold, and windswept grassland. It is a lost world, a continent that will one day drown. In 15,000 BCE, it is a highway of solid earth, a seemingly endless expanse of steppe and tundra, connecting Asia to the threshold of the New World. The climate of this Ice Age world is not just cold. It is defined by instability, aridity, and wind. The temperature difference between the glaciated poles and the equator is extreme, creating powerful, relentless global winds. These winds pick up the fine silt called loess from the dry riverbeds and glacial outwash plains and hurl it across the continents in perpetual globe-darkening dust storms. This loess settles in thick blankets across parts of North America, Europe, and Asia, forming the fertile topsoil that future civilizations will one day farm. Forests, which we see as the lungs of the planet, have shrunk. They survive in small protected pockets or refugia, clustered near the equator or in sheltered valleys. In their place, a new ecosystem has conquered the earth, the mammoth steppe. This is a vast, continuous biome that stretches from Spain across Eurasia, over the Beringian land bridge and into Alaska and the Yukon. It is not the lush, green grass of a modern prairie. It is a dry, cold, near-treeless plain, dominated by hardy grasses, sedges, and low-lying shrubs. It is a world of browns, grays, and pale greens, buried in snow for much of the year. But in the brief, intense summer, it explodes with nutritious vegetation. And this steppe is ruled by giants. This is the planet of the Pleistocene megafauna. These are not the animals of our world. They are bigger, shaggier, and built for a cold that would kill their modern relatives. Herds of woolly mammoths, mountains of flesh and fur with long, curving tusks, dominate the landscape. They are the great landscape architects, clearing shrubs and creating nutrient-rich clearings with their grazing. Alongside them move herds of steppe bison with massive shoulder humps and horns spanning 6 feet. Woolly rhinos like living tanks browse the tough vegetation. The predators are equally terrifying. The cave lion, 30% larger than its African counterpart, is the apex hunter of the steppe. Packs of dire wolves, heavier and more robust than any wolf today, hunt the giant horses and camels that graze the frozen plains. And looming over all of them is the short-faced bear, Arctodus simus, standing 6 feet at the shoulder on all fours and perhaps 12 feet tall when reared up. It is the largest mammalian land carnivore the world has seen. It is a long-limbed terror, built not for hibernation but to run down prey across the endless cold. South of the ice sheets, in the unglaciated parts of North America, this same cast of characters is joined by mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. This is their world. It has been for tens of thousands of years. They are perfectly adapted to it. They rule it. And where is humanity? In 15,000 BCE, humans, Homo sapiens, our own species, are an old world phenomenon. They have existed for over 200,000 years and have spread from Africa to Europe, across Asia, and even by remarkable sea voyages to the continent of Sahul. They have survived the worst of the ice. They are masters of fire and stone. They live in small nomadic bands following the great herds. They wear sophisticated tailored clothing of hide and fur, sewn with bone needles. They live in huts built of mammoth bones and skins. They are artists, painting breathtaking images of the great beasts on the walls of deep caves in France and Spain. They are survivors, intelligent and adaptable, but they have not yet seen the New World. For them, it does not exist. It is a land beyond the ice, a realm of pure speculation, if they even speculated about it at all. They are clustered in the more habitable parts of Eurasia, in the river valleys and coastal plains that offered shelter from the worst of the ice. But some groups, the toughest and most adventurous, live on the very edge of the world in the cold, windswept plains of Siberia. They hunt the mammoth and the bison, and they stare out at the endless frozen steppe of Beringia that leads where this then is the planet before the first Americans. It is a starker, larger, and more forbidding world. It is a world of impossible ice barriers and lost sunken continents. It is a world ruled by giants, creatures of fur and tusk and saber-tooth. It is a world poised on the brink of an immense transformation, a great thaw that will redraw the maps once again. And on the far edge of this world, a small group of human hunters following the herds are unknowingly standing on the threshold of a silent, empty continent. Beringia, the lost continent that connected worlds. The world of ice, as described, was a planet of barriers. Yet it held a secret. The very ice that locked down the continents and starved the oceans created a new world. A lost continent that would become the most critical gateway in human history. This land, now drowned beneath the cold, shallow waters of the Bering and Chukchi seas, was Beringia. It was not a bridge. It was a homeland. In 15,000 BCE, to walk from the plains of Siberia to the threshold of Alaska, one did not cross an icy, narrow causeway. One simply walked. The journey from Asia to America was not a migration from one continent to another, because Beringia was the continent. It was a vast, sprawling landmass, 1,000 miles wide from north to south, stretching from the Kolyma River in modern-day Russia to the Mackenzie River in Canada. This was a landmass larger than Texas and Alaska combined, a distinct and colossal piece of Pleistocene geography. The great paradox of Beringia was its climate. While the rest of the northern world lay entombed in ice, much of Beringia was ice-free. The colossal Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets to the east acted as a massive atmospheric wall, blocking moisture-laden storms from the Pacific. This ice sheet effect created a polar desert. Precipitation was incredibly low, meaning not enough snow fell to accumulate into the crushing glaciers that defined the age. It was a world of intense cold, but also of intense aridity, and during the brief, 24-hour sunlit summers, intense sunlight. This unique climate gave birth to a vanished ecosystem, the Mammoth Steppe. This was not the wet, boggy tundra of the modern Arctic, a landscape of mosses and saturated earth. The Mammoth Steppe was a cold, dry grassland. It was an endless rolling sea of hardy grasses, sedges, and forbs, punctuated by groves of dwarf willow and birch in sheltered river valleys. For 9 months of the year it was a world of frozen, wind-blasted brown, covered in a light dusting of snow. But for the 3-month summer it exploded into a highly nutritious prairie, a factory of life. This grassland was the engine that powered a world of giants. Beringia was the great highway and refuge for the Pleistocene megafauna. Herds of woolly mammoths, the undisputed kings of the steppe, moved in great family groups, their tusks used to sweep aside snow and their massive feet to break up the hard soil. They were the keystone species, and their grazing maintained the grasslands, preventing the encroachment of shrubs. Alongside them, tens of thousands of steppe bison, Bison priscus, larger and with more formidable horns than their modern descendants, thundered across the plains. The land was filled with movement. Herds of small, shaggy Yukon horses, a prime prey item, kicked up the frozen dust. Woolly rhinos, solitary and formidable, browsed the tougher vegetation. Herds of caribou, ancestors of today's, migrated across this lost continent, and where there were grazers, there were hunters. The predators of Beringia were a fearsome caste. Dire wolves, heavier and more powerful than any modern gray wolf, hunted in packs. The scimitar-toothed cat, Homotherium, a lion-sized predator with serrated fangs, was a specialist hunter of young mammoths. and dominating them all was the short-faced bear, a long-limbed giant that could run down a horse. This was a complete functioning world rich in biomass, a stark contrast to the sterile ice sheets that flanked it, and into this world, humans came. They were not crossing to America. They were simply expanding their hunting grounds, following the herds as they had always done. They came from the river valleys and coastal plains of northeastern Siberia, small nomadic bands of Homo sapiens perfectly adapted to the cold. They were resourceful, intelligent, and equipped with a sophisticated toolkit. They wore multi-layered tailored clothing of fur and hide, sewn with fine bone needles. They manufactured small, razor-sharp microblades of stone, which could be set into bone or antler handles to create complex, deadly spear points. They understood fire, shelter, and above all, the mammoth. For a long time it was believed these people simply walked across Beringia and, finding a gap in the ice, poured into North America. But the genetic story, read from the DNA of their living descendants, tells a far more complex and fascinating tale. This is the Beringian standstill hypothesis. The genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of all first Americans did indeed leave Siberia. But they did not immediately enter the Americas. Instead, they settled in Beringia, and they stayed. They were isolated, cut off from their parent populations in Siberia, perhaps by expanding glaciers to the west, and blocked from the Americas by the impassive wall of the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets to the east. They were trapped, not on a bridge, but in a homeland. And in this isolation they lived for thousands of years, perhaps for 5, 8, or even 10,000 years. For 300 generations, Beringia was their entire world. They were no longer Siberians. They were Beringians. In this vast, cold refuge, a new, distinct people was born. Life in Beringia was a constant struggle for survival. They were not just big-game hunters. While a mammoth kill was a windfall providing food, fuel, bones and fat, and building materials, tusks and hides for months, it was also incredibly dangerous. These people were skilled foragers. They likely hunted the steppe bison and the wild horses. They fished in the cold rivers for salmon. They trapped Arctic foxes and hares for their fur. On the southern coasts of Beringia, now deep underwater, they may have hunted seals and seabirds, learning the rhythms of two worlds, the steppe and the sea. They lived in small, mobile family groups. Their shelters may have been skin tents weighted with mammoth bones, or semi-subterranean pit houses dug into the permafrost and roofed with sod and hide. They watched the endless northern lights. They told stories around fires fueled by dry dung and willow branches. They were born, they loved, they died, and they were buried in the frozen soil of a continent that no longer exists. They were, in every sense, the first Beringians, but their world was not permanent. The great planetary pulse that had defined the Ice Age was beginning to change. Around 14,700 BCE, 16,700 years ago, the planet began to warm rapidly. This was the Bölling-Allerud interstadial, a sudden and dramatic thaw. The colossal ice sheets that had held the world hostage began to melt. For the people of Beringia, this was an apocalypse. The melting ice had two immediate, devastating consequences. First, the water had to go somewhere. The oceans of the world, starved for millennia, began to rise. Beringia was a low-lying flat plain. The rising sea was not a sudden tsunami, but a slow, relentless, and terrifying creep. Generation by generation, the coastline moved inland. Hunting grounds that had been used for centuries became tidal flats, then shallow seas. Rivers backed up, turning the dry steppe into a soggy marsh. The land was drowning. Second, the rising seas and warming climate brought moisture. The aridity that had preserved the mammoth steppe was broken. Rain and snow began to fall in greater amounts. The dry, nutritious grasses were choked out by the wet, mossy, and less nutritious vegetation of the modern tundra. The ecosystem that had supported the giants collapsed. The mammoths, horses, and bison lost their food source. Their populations crashed. The great herds that had defined the Pleistocene vanished from this land. The predators that hunted them starved. The entire world of the Beringians, their food, their materials, their landscape, was disappearing beneath water and moss. They were forced to move. The standstill was over. As their homeland drowned behind them, two paths opened. Some groups were pushed back west, re-merging with the Siberian populations, but others were pushed east toward the great ice walls. And just as their land was drowning, those ice walls were also melting. The two great sheets, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran, were pulling apart. For the first time in millennia, a path, a new, narrow, and dangerous path, was opening. A corridor of land was emerging between the two retreating glaciers. It was an escape route. The Beringians, refugees from a drowned continent, were the only people in the world poised to take it. They picked up their spears, gathered their families, and turned their faces from the rising sea. They began to walk east into the unknown, following the last of the great herds into a land no human had ever seen. They were not explorers. They were survivors. And they were about to become the first Americans. The paleo-pioneers, faces of the first migration. The drowning of a continent is not a quiet event. It is a slow apocalypse of rising water, sodden earth, and vanishing herds. For the Beringians, the people who had lived for 100 generations in the cold, dry heart of this lost land, the world was ending. The mammoth steppe that had fed them was becoming a bog. The mammoths themselves, their great shaggy gods of the plains, were disappearing, their trails growing few and faint. Behind them, the sea crept forward. Ahead of them, the 2-mile-high walls of the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, which had barred the way for millennia, were finally, agonizingly, pulling apart. This is the moment of Genesis. This is where Beringians cease to be and the paleo-pioneers are born. They are the faces of the first migration, a people without a name for themselves, driven from the only home they had ever known into a world no human had ever seen. Who were they? We must clear our minds of cavemen. These were Homo sapiens as modern as us, forged in the planet's harshest crucible. They were the survivors of a 10,000-year standstill in the most brutal environment on Earth. They were, in short, the most adaptable, resilient, and resourceful people alive. Physically, they were tough and compact, their bodies built to conserve heat. Their faces were weathered by a wind that never seemed to stop, their skin darkened by the relentless summer sun reflecting off snow and ice. Their eyes, perhaps showing the epicanthic fold of their Siberian ancestors, were sharp, constantly scanning the horizon for the flick of a caribou's tail or the subtle shift in a snowdrift that betrayed a hidden danger. They were not a large population. The entire founding group that would populate 2 continents may have been only a few thousand strong, perhaps just a few hundred. They traveled in small multi-generational family bands of 20 to 50 people. Their world was held together by kinship. The group was everything. Survival was not an individual pursuit, but a collective, non-negotiable pact. Every member had a role. The elders, too old to hunt, were the libraries of the people. They held the oral histories, the maps of the mind, the knowledge of which plants were poison and which could be dried for fuel. They were the ones who had seen the long walk ice advance and retreat before. Their memories were the group's charter. The hunters were the providers. They were men and women in their prime, masters of a deadly and sophisticated technology. They did not charge a mammoth with crude wooden sticks. They carried the atlatl or spear thrower, This simple-looking piece of wood or antler was a force multiplier, a mechanical extension of the human arm that allowed a hunter to launch a light, fletched spear or dart with incredible velocity and accuracy. It was the ballistic missile of the Pleistocene. Their spear points were not crude, heavy stones. They were works of microengineering. These were the people of the microblade tradition. They would take a high-quality piece of chert or obsidian, and with immense skill core it, striking off dozens of small, razor-sharp blades. These blades were as sharp as surgical steel. They were then set like teeth into a groove carved in a streamlined bone or antler point. The result was a weapon that was light, replaceable, and horribly lethal, designed to slice deep into muscle and artery, causing massive blood loss. The women were the engineers of life. They were masters of hideworking, using small, hafted stone scrapers to clean caribou and bison skins. Their most important tool, more valuable than any spear, was the bone needle. With needles fashioned from bird bones and thread made from animal sinew, they created the world's most advanced cold-weather clothing. This was not a loose drape of fur. This was a tailored, multi-layered survival system. Fur-lined parkas with hoods, fitted trousers, and waterproof boots or mukluks. This technology was the difference between life and a frozen death in minutes. They were the ones who decided when to move camp, where to find shelter, and how to process every part of a kill. Spiritually, their world was alive. They were animists. The ice had a will. The wind had a voice. The mammoth they hunted was a person who, if treated with the proper respect in death, would give itself to the people. The earth was a web of reciprocal relationships, and survival depended on navigating them. To step into the new world was not just a physical journey. It was a terrifying spiritual leap into a land that had no ancestors, no stories, no familiar spirits to guide or placate. Let us imagine one such band at the dawn of this migration, around 14,500 BCE. We can call them the children of the horse, for it is the last herds of the small Yukon horse they follow. Their leader is not a great chief, but a quiet, watchful woman named Scylla, the Stitcher, whose knowledge of where to find the last dry willow branches for fire is more important than any hunter's strength. With her is Akin, the flint napper, a young hunter who can read the subtle cracks in a frozen river as if it were a map, and who dreams of a land his grandfather told him about, a land without ice. They stand at the eastern edge of Beringia. Their world is a ruin of meltwater, fog, and rotting tundra. The sea is a constant, menacing presence to their south and west. To the east is the Great Cleft, the path that has just opened. It is not a green, welcoming valley. It is the most terrifying landscape on Earth. It is a corridor perhaps only a few dozen miles wide, but 1,000 miles long. On either side, walls of ice rise sheer and blue-white, groaning and cracking with a sound like thunder. The wind in this canyon is a constant screaming gale, a river of frigid air pouring down from the ice sheets. The ground is a wasteland of gravel or glacial till, sharp rocks and half-frozen mud. Great temporary lakes of meltwater, lakes the size of modern states, block the path, and then suddenly drain in cataclysmic floods that scour the corridor down to bedrock. There is almost nothing to eat. This is a sterile new land. The first life to move in are the hardiest plants, mosses, lichens, and dwarf shrubs. The animals follow. Not the great herds of the steppe, but desperate pioneering groups themselves. A few bison, a handful of mammoths, perhaps a pack of dire wolves. This is what the paleo-pioneers follow. They are not exploring. They are hunting, step by desperate step. Scylla's band makes the choice. They turn from the setting sun, from the drowned graves of their ancestors, and walk into the cleft. Their first days are a vision of hell. The wind steals their breath and rips at their skin tents. The noise of the ice is constant, robbing them of sleep. They move from one gravel bar to another, their feet bleeding. The children, bundled in furs, are carried on their mothers' backs. The old ones, the libraries, struggle, and some are left behind, buried under a cairn of stones in a land with no name. They hunt a lone bison, and it feeds them for a week. They find a clutch of ptarmigan eggs. They push forward, driven by an imperative stronger than fear, hunger. They are not thinking of populating a continent. They are thinking of the next meal, the next dry patch of ground to make a fire, the next rock overhang to escape the wind. These are the faces of the first migration. They are not mythical heroes. They are hungry, cold, and terrified people. They are families. They are mothers quieting crying infants in the dark. They are hunters sharing the last piece of dried meat. They are humans doing the most human thing, refusing to give up. For a generation, or perhaps two, they are lost in this world of ice. And then one day Akin, now an older man, his eyes as sharp as ever, crests a rocky moraine. He stops, the wind in his face changes. It is warmer, and it smells different. Not of ice and rock, but of pine and dust and animals. He looks south, and for the first time in his life, in the life of his people, he sees it. The ice walls have ended. Below him, stretching out as far as the eye can see, is a new world. A world of rolling plains teeming with bison, camelops, and horses. A world untouched, silent, and waiting. The great ice prison is broken. They have arrived. The great hunt, following the mammoth's trail. The world south of the ice was a symphony of life, a thundering, grazing, endless expanse of grassland. For the paleo-pioneers, the survivors of the ice corridor, it was a profound shock. The land they had left behind was a sterile canyon of wind and gravel. This new world, stretching from the foot of the melting glaciers to a horizon they could not see, was a living, breathing larder. It was the American Serengeti, an ecosystem now vanished, and it was ruled by giants. Great herds of Pleistocene horses, smaller and shaggier than their modern counterparts, kicked up the low dust. Herds of camelops, the American camel, browsed the low shrubs. And everywhere there were bison, not the familiar bison of today, but bison antiquus, a larger long-horned beast that moved in herds so vast they stained the plains brown. This was a world of plenty, but one animal above all was the key to their survival. It was the linchpin of their new life, the provider of all things, the great shaggy lord of the plains, the Columbian mammoth. This was not the smaller, woollier mammoth of their Beringian past. This was its larger southern cousin, a creature standing 13 feet at the shoulder, weighing over 10 tons. It was a mountain of flesh, fur, and potential. For the paleo-pioneers, the mammoth was not just food. It was a walking superstore, a one-stop shop for survival. A single kill provided thousands of pounds of high-energy meat, rich in the fat they craved. Its massive, thick hide could cover their shelters. Its bones, the great curving ribs and massive femurs, were the architectural framework for those same huts. Its stomach and bladder could be cleaned and used as water containers. Its long, tough sinews were the thread for their clothes and the lashing for their weapons. Its ivory tusks could be carved into tools, atlatl weights, and needles. To hunt the mammoth was to secure life for months. To fail was to face hunger and cold. And so the descendants of the first pioneers, the grandchildren of Sila and Akin, became, above all else, mammoth hunters. They were the apex predators of this new world, and they followed the trail of the mammoth as it pulled them deeper into the heart of the continent. This new purpose forged a new people and a new, iconic technology. This was the dawn of what archaeologists would one day call the Clovis culture. Their identity was etched in stone, specifically in the magnificent lethal spear points they engineered. The Clovis point was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, a perfect blend of artistry and function. They were not just chipped rocks. They were made from the finest grained chert, obsidian, and jasper, materials these people would travel hundreds of miles to quarry. The point was large, leaf-shaped, and shockingly sharp. But its true genius was the flute, a long, distinctive channel struck from the base of the point. This flute was a brilliant innovation, allowing the point to be set deep into the split end of a wooden or bone spear shaft. When lashed tight with wet sinew, which shrunk as it dried, the point and shaft became a single indivisible unit, incredibly durable and perfectly streamlined for penetration. These points were the payload, and they were delivered by the atlatl, the spear thrower that gave these hunters the power of a rifle at close range. Let us follow one band, 2 generations removed from the ice, on the plains of what is now Wyoming. Their leader, Cale, is a man who thinks in maps of herds. He has his grandfather Akin's eyes, and he has spotted their target, a lone mammoth, a young bull separated from the main herd, grazing near a steep-walled arroyo. A healthy adult in a herd was untouchable, but a lone one, if they were smart, was possible. The hunt begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. Cale and his 5 best hunters move like shadows, their bodies smeared with mud and clay to mask their human scent. The wind is in their faces. The atlatls are in their hands, each holding a 6-foot dart tipped with a gleaming, fresh-napped Clovis point. They are not just hunters. They are a coordinated pack, as intelligent as the dire wolves that watch them from a distant ridge. They spend hours maneuvering, using the rolling hills to stay hidden, pushing the mammoth gently, without spooking it, toward the arroyo. The plan is simple. Use the landscape as a weapon. The bull, unsuspecting, ambles into the dry riverbed to browse on some willow. Cale gives the signal, a sharp whistle like a hawk's cry. The attack is instant and overwhelming. 2 hunters, the chasers, break from cover, screaming and waving their spears, running at the mammoth's flank from the open side. The bull bellows, startled, and does exactly what Cale predicted. It turns away from the noise, deeper into the arroyo, toward the trap. Kyle and the 3 strikers rise from their hiding spots on the arroyo's rim, high above the animal. The mammoth sees them too late. It tries to stop, to turn, but the walls are too steep. It is cornered. Now, Cale roars. The sound of the atlatls is a sharp, ripping thwack. 4 darts fly, not at the thick-skulled head, but at the vulnerable sides behind the ribs, aiming for the massive lungs and heart. The hunters throw with their entire bodies, the atlatls' whip-like motion sending the spears at over 90 miles per hour. 3-point strike true. The barbed bone foreshafts, connected to the main spear by a line of sinew, detach and toggle deep inside the wound, like a harpoon. The mammoth screams, a deafening trumpet of rage and pain. It rears, smashing its tusks against the arroyo wall. It charges the bank where Cale stands, but the loose gravel gives way and it slides back. Blood, bright red and frothy, gushes from its side. A long shot, but it is not dead. It is a 10-ton engine of fury. The chasers scramble up the bank, and the 6 hunters are now on the rim above their prey. The great hunt has now become a waiting game, a deadly siege. The mammoth charges back and forth in the narrow channel, weakening with every step. The hunters jog along the rim, following it, their faces grim. They are patient. They are professionals. For an hour, the standoff continues. The bull's movements become slower, its roars less frequent. Finally, it stumbles, and its great back legs give out. It sinks to its knees, its massive head drooping, its breath coming in shuddering, wet gasps. Cale nods. He and another hunter carrying heavy, thick-shafted spears, lances, not darts, slide down the bank. This is the most dangerous moment. A dying mammoth's last act can be a fatal one. They approach cautiously from the side. The bull's eye, large and ancient, clouded with pain, watches them. It tries to lift its trunk but has no strength. Kale steps in close, just behind the shoulder, and with a two-handed upward driving thrust he sinks his lance deep into the animal's heart. The great beast shudders. A long sigh escapes its lungs, and it is still. Silence falls on the arroyo, broken only by the panting of the hunters. They do not cheer. Kyle places a hand on the animal's rough hide. He speaks to its spirit, a quiet word of thanks and apology, a promise that no part of this gift will be wasted. The pact is sealed. The signal goes up, a column of smoke from a quick-lit fire. Within hours, the rest of the band arrives, the women, the children, the elders. The arroyo is transformed from a kill site into a factory. The work of processing is as intense as the hunt. With sharp flint knives, the women, the true butchers, begin the colossal task of skinning. The hide is pulled back in sections. The meat is carved out in great steaming slabs. Children scurry, carrying choice cuts to the processing station on the plains above. Elders sharpen dulled stone tools. Nothing stops. They are in a race against scavengers, the dire wolves, the short-faced bears, and the wheeling vultures. Some meat is eaten immediately, roasted over an open fire, a feast of celebration. But most is for the future. Women slice it paper-thin and lay it on wooden racks to dry in the wind, creating jerky that will last for months. The massive leg bones are cracked open for their rich, high-energy marrow. The stomach is cleaned and becomes a water bag. The intestines are braided. The thick layers of fat are rendered into tallow for fuel. For 2 weeks, the arroyo is their home. They feast and they work. When they are finished, the skeleton is picked clean. Kale's band packs their dried meat and their new tools. They are fed, they are clothed, they are armed. They are ready to move on. They scan the southern horizon, and for the first time, they see the faint, dark line of another distant herd. The great hunt is over. The great hunt begins anew. The trail continues, and they follow it. A river of people flowing into a new land. Survival at the edge. Life on the frozen Arctic steppe south, far to the south, beyond the melting monuments of ice. The paleo pioneers were feasting. The grandchildren of those who had braved the ice corridor were now masters of a new, warmer world, a continent teeming with giants. They were the Clovis people, the great hunters, their fluted spears felling mammoths on sun-drenched plains. Theirs was a story of rapid expansion, of plenty, of conquest. This is not their story. This is the story of those who stayed behind. This is the story of the other first Americans, the ones who never took the southern path, or whose ancestors had arrived by a different coastal route. This is the story of the people who remained in the far, frozen north, the vast ice-free refugium of Alaska and the Yukon. This land, the unsubmerged eastern remnant of Beringia, was the true frozen Arctic steppe. And for the people who lived here, life was not a grand hunt. It was a daily, grinding, and brilliant act of survival. This was a land on the brink. The year is 11,000 BCE. The Great Thaw is well underway. The drowning of Beringia is almost complete. The sea having swallowed the 1,000-mile highway to Siberia, isolating these people. The climate, once cold and dry, is becoming warmer and wetter. The mammoth steppe, the great nutritious grassland that had fed the giants, is dying. It is being choked out by a new, wetter, boggier landscape of moss-rich tundra. The mammoths are almost gone. The shaggy Yukon horses and the giant steppe bison are scarce, their herds dwindling. The people who live here are the descendants of those who watched the ice-free corridor open and chose not to enter. Or perhaps they were a separate migration, a different wave of humanity. They are a people of the Paleo-Arctic tradition, their stone tools distinct from the great Clovis points of the south. They are a people defined not by abundance, but by their incredible resilience in the face of scarcity. They live as they have for 1,000 years, on the edge of the world and on the edge of extinction. Let us call them the Man-E-Deen. the people of the wind. Their group consists of 32 souls, and they are camped on a high, wind-scoured bluff overlooking a frozen river valley. Their leader is a woman named Akka, an elder whose face is a map of 1,000 winter storms. Her memory holds the stories of the Amam-Toth, the great tusked beasts her grandfather hunted. She has not seen one since she was a girl. Their lives are governed by a brutal seasonal clock. Summer is a 3-month-long sprint of frantic, sleepless work. Under a sun that never sets, the band moves constantly. The men hunt the migrating caribou, their primary source of meat, using atlatls to throw small, wickedly sharp darts tipped with microblades. These are not the large, single-use points of the Clovis hunters. Theirs is a technology of conservation. From a single, carefully prepared core of stone, a skilled napper can strike dozens of small, razor-sharp blades, each one a potential weapon. It is the toolkit of a people who cannot afford to waste an ounce of good stone. While the hunters are out, the women and children are the engine of survival. They fish for salmon and Arctic char, building stone weirs in the shallow rivers to trap them. They snare Arctic foxes, hares, and ptarmigans. They are the true masters of the tundra, digging for edible roots, gathering the few sour berries, and collecting every last twig of dwarf willow for their fires. Every calorie is counted. Every scrap of fur, sinew, and bone is processed. The primary task of summer is not to live, but to prepare. The meat is sliced thin and dried on racks. The fat is rendered into tallow. The skins are scraped, cured, and sewn, because they all know what is coming. The long night. Winter on the Arctic steppe is a 9-month siege. It is not just cold. It is a profound alien cold that freezes moisture in the air, that shatters rocks, that can kill a man in minutes. It is a world of crushing darkness, of howling, relentless wind, and of silence. The Manny Dean do not live in skin tents. They live inside the earth. Their home is a semi-subterranean pit house dug into the permafrost. The roof is a low-domed framework of willow branches and, if they are lucky, a few scavenged mammoth ribs from a long-dead skeleton. This framework is covered in layers of hide and then insulated with thick blocks of sod, cut from the tundra in the summer. Inside, the world is reduced to a single, smoky, cramped, skin-lined room. It is lit and heated by a single stone lamp, a shallow bowl of soapstone filled with rendered bison fat or seal oil, with a wick of moss. This lamp is the heart of the family. It is their fire, their light, their warmth. To let it go out is to invite death. In this cramped space, life continues. This is the time of making. The men, their fingers stiff with cold, sit for hours chipping at stone cores. They repair their atlatls, straighten spear shafts, and carve new harpoon heads from antler. The women, led by Akka, perform the most critical task of all, sewing. Their clothing is the most sophisticated technology they possess. They wear tailored 2-layered outfits. The inner layer has the fur turned in, trapping body heat. The outer layer has the fur turned out, shedding snow and wind. Their boots, stitched with waterproof seams from cured skin, are lined with dried grass for insulation. A single rip, a single failed seam means frostbite, gangrene, and death. Their bone needles, finer than any modern steel, fly back and forth in the smoky orange light of the lamp. This is also the time of storytelling. Akka, her eyes closed, chants the old stories. She tells of the first people who rode the back of the mammoth from the land of the setting sun. She tells of the crow, the trickster who stole the sun and brought light to the world. These stories are not entertainment. They are manuals for survival. They are social glue. They are the history that binds their tiny, fragile band together in the vast, killing darkness. But survival has a cost. It is now the moon of the deepest cold, what we would call February. The dried meat is running low. The hunters go out, their faces masked in fur into the dim twilight. They are checking their snare lines, small loops of sinew set in the snow. They come back with 3 foxes and a hare. It is not enough. AK's son, Kael, is the lead hunter. He is a man of few words, his body lean and scarred. He knows the bison, their last hope, have moved on, seeking better grazing further south. But to follow them would be to abandon the elders, to abandon their shelter. It is an impossible choice. He decides on a desperate gamble. He and 2 others will travel to the Singing Rocks, a 3-day walk to the coast, to hunt seals at their breathing holes in the sea ice. It is a journey into the teeth of the polar wind. They are gone for 10 days. In the pit house, the lamp burns low. Eka rations the last of the dried fish. The children are silent, huddled together for warmth. One of the elders, Aka's sister, stops breathing in the night. She is not sick. She is just finished. There is no wailing. There is only a deep, weary silence. They move her body to the frozen entrance tunnel, to be buried when the ground thaws. The band is 2 days from starvation when the hunters return. They are ghosts, their faces caked in ice, their fur parkas stiff as wood. But they are carrying heavy packs. They have killed a ugruk, a large bearded seal. It is a miracle. They collapse by the lamp and the women bring them warm broth. Kael's wife Nima cuts the seal blubber. She fills the lamp. The flame burns high and bright, flooding the small hut with warmth and golden light. She cuts the dark, rich meat. The band eats. They eat in silence, a profound animal gratitude. The meat is oily, strong, and it is life. This is survival on the edge. It is not the glorious charge of the Clovis hunter. It is the patience of Aka stitching a seam. It is the technological brilliance of a microblade. It is the desperation of Kael, standing over a seal hole for 72 hours, his spear poised, his body slowly freezing. It is the community huddling together in the dark, sharing a single flame. These are the people of the North. They are the forgotten founders, the ones who endured. They would not conquer a continent, but they would give rise to the great Arctic cultures, the Inuit, the Aleut, the Dene. They are the ultimate survivors, the people of the wind holding on, generation after generation to the very last, frozen edge of the human world. The 2-path mystery: did they walk or paddle south? For decades, the story of how the Americas were peopled was a simple, powerful epic. It was a story of land. It began with the Beringian survivors, the paleo pioneers stepping out of their drowned homeland. It followed them through a 1,000-mile-long canyon of ice, the ice-free corridor. And it climaxed with their emergence onto the great, beast-filled plains of North America, where they became the Clovis hunters, their fluted spears the calling card of the first and fastest continental conquest in human history. This was the Clovis first model. It was clean, it was dramatic, and it was built on the solid rock of 2 geological facts: the existence of the Beringian land bridge and the eventual opening of the corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets. The people, it was said, simply waited for the path to open, and then they walked. But a mystery like a deep-running river was cutting its way through the bedrock of this beautiful theory. The mystery was time. The ice-free corridor was a brutal place. As the 2 great ice sheets melted, they did not pull apart to reveal a welcoming, grassy valley. They revealed a sterile, apocalyptic wasteland of gravel, ice-dammed lakes and screaming winds. For this 1,000-mile-long gauntlet to be survivable, it needed life. It needed plants to grow on the gravel, and it needed animals, bison, caribou, horses, to eat those plants. Without a food source to hunt along the way, the journey was a suicide mission. Geologists and paleoecologists worked for decades to date the corridor's viability. Their data was a bombshell. The corridor may have physically opened as early as 15,000 years ago, but it was not biologically viable, not capable of supporting human life, until much later. The first willow shrubs and grasses might not have taken root until 14,000 years ago. The first animals might not have arrived until 13,500 years ago. This was a problem, because far, far to the south archaeologists were digging, and they were finding things that shouldn't exist. The most famous, the site that broke the model, was Monte Verde, deep in southern Chile. There, under a peat bog that preserved organic materials perfectly, Tom Dillahay uncovered the remains of a human settlement. It wasn't a kill site, it was a home. There were wooden hut foundations, scraps of animal hide, and medicinal plants all preserved. And the date, confirmed and reconfirmed, was a staggering 14,500 years ago. The implications were world-shattering. How could people be living in southern Chile, 10,000 miles south of the ice, a full 1,000 years before the ice-free corridor was even a passable, survivable pathway? It meant the story was wrong. It meant they didn't walk. Not at first. It meant there had to be another way. A second path. This is the story of that path. It is not a story of land but of water. It is not the story of the mammoth hunter, but of the sea otter hunter. It is the kelp highway hypothesis. To understand this path, we must return to Beringia. The Beringians were not a single people. The hunters who followed the mammoth on the interior steppe were one group. But Beringia also had a vast southern coastline, a coastline that is now 400 feet underwater. And living along this coast was almost certainly another group of people, a maritime people. Let us call them the children of the kelp. Their ancestors had not come from the deep interior of Siberia, but from its coastal regions where they had learned to harvest the sea. When they settled in Beringia, they did not move inland. They stayed by the water. Their world was not the brown, frozen steppe. It was a rich, dynamic world of gray water, black rock, and green kelp. They were masters of a different technology. Their primary tool was not the atlatl, but the harpoon, with a barbed head of antler that could toggle inside a seal's blubber. They used bonefish hooks and nets woven from sinew. And most importantly, they had boats. They were not great ships, but small, highly seaworthy vessels made from a frame of driftwood or bone, covered in the stitched, waterproof hides of sea lions or walrus. They were the ancestors of the kayak and the umiak, and they were the key. When the great thaw began, their world also drowned. But as the sea rose, it didn't just push them, it led them. As the Cordilleran ice sheet, the great wall of ice covering the entire Pacific coast, began to melt, it did not retreat from the coast evenly. It melted back from the sea's edge, leaving a string of newly exposed ice-free islands, rocky headlands, and fjords. This chain of coastal refugia became a highway, and it was a highway rich in life. This kelp highway was a single, continuous, and incredibly rich ecosystem that stretched from Japan, across Beringia's southern shore, and all the way down the coast of the Americas to Chile. A kelp forest, whether in Alaska or in California, supports the same essential cast of characters: sea otters, sea lions, seals, rockfish, sea urchins, and an abundance of edible seaweeds. For the children of the kelp, this was a world they already understood. Let us imagine a family, around 16,000 years ago. Kova and his family are in their skin boat, a low-slung, 30-foot-long vessel. It is packed with their entire world: skin bags of rendered seal fat, dried seaweed, bundles of fur, and their precious toolkit of harpoons and hooks. To their left is the open, gray, heaving Pacific. To their right, a sight of impossible, terrifying beauty: the Cordilleran ice sheet, a wall of blue-white ice a mile high, calving into the sea with a sound like thunder. They are not in the ice-free corridor. They are on the water, paddling beside the ice. They are island hopping. The journey is not a desperate, non-stop sprint. It is a series of moves from one resource patch to the next. They paddle for a day, guided by the migrating whales. They spot a rocky, treeless island newly free of ice. They land, pulling their precious boat high onto the shore. The island is teeming. The women and children move along the tide pools, prying up mussels and abalone. The men, Kova and his son, stalk a colony of sea lions. They kill one, a massive bull. It is a feast. It is oil for their lamps, new hides for their boat, and meat for a week. They are never in a sterile wasteland. They are always at the edge of the sea's bounty. This life is perilous. A storm can shatter their boat. A rogue wave can sweep them from the rocks. But it is possible, and it is fast. Moving in boats, unburdened by having to walk and hunt, they could have traveled far and fast, covering dozens of miles on a good day. A journey from Alaska to Chile, in this leapfrog fashion, might have taken only 1,000 or 2,000 years. This, then, is the solution to the mystery. This is how a 14,500-year-old settlement could exist in Chile. The paddlers were the first. They were the true pioneers, the maritime wave that slipped past the ice unseen. Why is it still a mystery? Because the kelp highway is now gone. The sea that rose and drowned Beringia also rose and drowned these coastal camps. The campsites of Kova's people are now 400 feet below the waves, almost impossible to find. We are left with only tantalizing clues. The ancient 13,000-year-old remains of the Arlington Springs man, found on Santa Rosa Island in California, a place that could only be reached by boat. And, of course, Monteverde. The peopling of the Americas was not one story, but two. It was a two-pronged attack on a silent continent. First came the paddlers, the children of the kelp, the ghost-like maritime pioneers. They hugged the coast, invisible to archaeology, their story written on water, and they were the ones who brought humanity to the New World. And then, 1,000 years later, the land bridge walkers, the children of the horse and the mammoth, followed. The ice-free corridor finally melted and became green. They emerged onto the plains and became the Clovis people. They were not the first Americans. They were the first interior Americans. The two paths, one of water and one of land, were the two great streams of a single river, a river of people, flowing from a lost continent to populate a new one. The Clovis controversy, debunking the first American theory for much of the 20th century. The story of the first Americans was a settled matter, a high-stakes archaeological drama with a clear beginning, a charismatic star, and a dramatic conclusion. It was called the Clovis First Model, and it was as elegant as it was powerful. It was also, as we now know, wrong. The star of this story was a piece of stone, the Clovis Point, first discovered in 1932 near Clovis, New Mexico. Nestled among the bones of a mammoth, it was an icon of human ingenuity. It was a large, beautifully crafted, leaf-shaped spear point, and it had a unique, patented feature, a flute or a channel struck from its base, allowing it to be hafted to a spear shaft with incredible stability. It was, unequivocally, the work of master hunters. As archaeologists fanned out across North America, they found these points everywhere, from the plains of Arizona to the forests of Nova Scotia, from Mexico to Montana. The same distinct fluted points were being uncovered, and they were all consistently dated to a very specific and very narrow window of time, roughly 13,500 to 12,900 years ago. From these stone breadcrumbs, a grand unifying theory was built. The Clovis people, the story went, were the first Americans. They were a single Paleo-Indian culture. They had walked from Beringia, through the newly opened ice-free corridor, and burst onto the North American plains around 13,500 years ago. They were, in this narrative, the ultimate blitzkrieg. They were big-game hunters. A wave of humanity so skilled and so swift that they swept from the Arctic to the tip of South America in just a few hundred years, hunting the great Pleistocene megafauna, the mammoth, the mastodon, the giant bison, into extinction as they went. For generations, this was not a theory. It was archaeological dogma. And for generations, this dogma was enforced by a powerful, informal group of academics sometimes called the Clovis Police. This was the archaeological establishment, and they guarded the Clovis first model with a fierce, almost religious zeal. The rules were simple. No human site in the Americas could be older than Clovis. Period. This created a powerful archaeological wall. Any archaeologist who claimed to have found something older faced a brutal, career-threatening battle. Their evidence was dismissed, their methods attacked, their reputations questioned. A find of pre-Clovis stone tools. They were geofacts, rocks naturally broken to look like tools. A pre-Clovis carbon date? The sample must have been contaminated by older carbon from a nearby coal seam. A pre-Clovis fire pit? It was almost certainly a natural burn from a lightning strike. One of the first to run afoul of this wall was James Adovasio at the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania. Beginning in the 1970s, Adovasio's team meticulously excavated a deep, perfectly layered site, and far below the Clovis layer, they found stone tools and evidence of human occupation. The dates they got were stunning. 16,000, even 19,000 years ago. The backlash was immediate and brutal. For decades, the site was dismissed, Adovasio's careful work ridiculed, and his dates blamed on contamination. But while the controversy raged in North America, a different kind of evidence was being quietly uncovered. Far, far to the south, it was a site that would not just crack the Clovis wall, it would shatter it. The site was Monte Verde in southern Chile. It was 10,000 miles south of the ice-free corridor, the absolute end of the line for any land-based migration. It was excavated by Tom Dillahay, and what he found was not just a scatter of stone tools. Because the site had been preserved in a waterlogged peat bog, it was a biological time capsule. Dillahay uncovered the foundations of 12 wooden huts, still held together with cordage. He found scraps of animal hide. He found the footprints of a child preserved in the clay. He found mastodon meat still clinging to bone. He found a vast array of over 90 different plant species, many of them medicinal, indicating a deep, long-held knowledge of the local environment. And he found the dates. The main level of occupation at Monte Verde was 14,500 years old. This was 1,000 years before the first Clovis point was ever napped. It was 1,000 years before the ice-free corridor was even a biologically viable, survivable pathway. The implications were unthinkable. For the Monte Verde dates to be correct, the Clovis first model had to be fundamentally wrong. It meant people had not come through the corridor. It meant they must have come by another route, the coastal, kelp highway. And it meant they must have arrived much earlier, giving them time to populate 2 entire continents all the way to the tip of Chile. For a decade, Dillahay, like Adovasio, was attacked. But his evidence was too good. The organic preservation was undeniable. Finally, in 1997, the academic world made an unprecedented move. A blue ribbon panel of the world's most prominent archaeologists, including some of the most ardent Clovis first defenders, agreed to visit Monte Verde. They walked the site. They examined the artifacts, the wooden tools, the hut foundations, the hearths. They reviewed the stratigraphy and the carbon dating. And at the end of their visit, they rendered a unanimous verdict. Monte Verde was real. The dates were correct. Humans had been in the New World long before Clovis. It was the moment the dam broke. The Clovis first model was dead. The controversy was over and a debunking had occurred. But in its place, a new, far more exciting mystery emerged. If Clovis wasn't first, who was? The floodgates of research opened. Suddenly, archaeologists were free to find and report what they had been seeing for years. In Florida, at the Page-Ladson site, researchers pulled up stone tools and a mastodon tusk with clear human-made cut marks from the bottom of a sinkhole. The date, 14,550 years ago. In Idaho, at Cooper's Ferry, archaeologists found simple stemmed projectile points, a completely different technology from Clovis, dating to 16,000 years ago. In Texas, the Galt site revealed a massive, continuous occupation, with a pre-Clovis toolkit lying directly beneath the Clovis artifacts, proving a transition between two separate peoples. And then came the true bombshell. In 2021, at White Sands National Park in New Mexico, scientists announced a discovery that reset the clock entirely. There, preserved in the dried mud of an ancient lake bed, were human footprints, hundreds of them. They were the tracks of adults and children walking, playing. Using seeds preserved in the footprint layers, scientists dated them. The tracks were between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. This is not just pre-Clovis. This is during the last glacial maximum, the peak of the Ice Age, when the great ice sheets were at their largest. The ice-free corridor was sealed shut, and the kelp highway would have been a perilous gauntlet of glaciers. The Clovis controversy has given way to a new profound reality. Clovis was not the beginning. They were simply one chapter, a widespread, highly successful, and very visible chapter in a much, much longer book. The first Americans are no longer a single people. They are a complex tapestry of multiple migrations, multiple technologies, and multiple timelines. They were paddlers and walkers. They were the enigmatic 23,000-year-old people of White Sands, the 16,000-year-old stemmed point makers of Idaho, the 14,500-year-old coastal people of Chile, and then the 13,500-year-old Clovis hunters of the plains. The tidy, simple epic is gone. In its place is a deeper, richer, and far more mysterious story, one whose earliest chapters we are only just now learning to read. A land of giants, confronting the American megafauna. The first humans to step into the heart of the Americas, whether from the icy coastal route or the wind-scoured northern corridor, entered a world that no longer exists. It was a continent that had evolved in relative isolation for millions of years. It was a land where the rules of life were written on a different scale. The trees, the rivers, and the plains were vast, but they were dwarfed by the creatures that walked upon them. This was not a land of animals. This was a land of giants. For the paleo pioneers, small bands of humans accustomed to the harsh, dwindling fauna of Beringia or the icy coast, this was a world of profound shock and awe. Every new valley, every new plain revealed a creature that defied belief. They had stepped out of their familiar world and into a real-life mythology, a place where monsters were not stories for the fire, but a daily, thundering reality. The air itself felt heavy, alive with the grunts, bellows, and earth-shaking footsteps of the Pleistocene megafauna. The most dominant, the kings of this landscape, were the proboscideans. In the open parklands and plains of the West, it was the Columbian mammoth. Taller than any mammoth they had ever seen in the North, standing 13 feet at the shoulder, it was a moving mountain range. A herd of these creatures was a geological event, their deep, resonating calls of vibration felt in the chest long before they were seen. In the wetter, denser woodlands of the east, a different stranger giant lurked. This was the mastodon, shorter, stockier, and more robust than the mammoth. It was a creature of the forest, a browser, its conical tusks perfect for stripping bark and breaking branches. For a hunter, to encounter one in the shadowed forest was to meet a guardian, a 10-ton spirit of the trees. The hunters, with their Clovis points and atlatls, had to relearn the rules of the hunt. They had hunted mammoths before, but these were larger. The landscape was different. They adapted, developing new strategies, using the landscape to their advantage, driving the great beasts into arroyos or bogs where their size became a fatal liability. But the mammoths and mastodons, while awesome, were at least familiar in form. Other creatures were not. Other creatures were impossibilities. Imagine a small band of foragers, a mother and her children moving through a stand of trees. They emerge into a clearing and freeze. Standing there, grazing like a giant bison, is a living, walking fortress. It is a glyptodon, a colossal cousin of the armadillo the size of a modern Volkswagen Beetle. It is covered from its nose to the tip of its tail in a domed, impenetrable shell of bony plates. It looks at the humans with small, indifferent eyes. Their spears, so lethal against flesh, would be useless, shattering against its armor. They can only stare in a mixture of terror and wonder as the living rock ambles away. Or imagine a hunting party, tracking a herd of horses. They follow them into a high meadow and stop, the horses forgotten. Reared up on its massive hind legs, its back braced against a giant pine, is a creature that should not exist. It stands nearly 20 feet tall, as high as a giraffe. It is a megatherium, the giant ground sloth. But this is no slow, gentle creature. It is a colossal beast with a bear-like snout, a massive, muscular tongue, and most terrifyingly a set of 12-inch scythe-like claws. It is pulling down the branches of the pine, stripping them of their leaves. It is an herbivore, but it is a monster. The hunters know instinctively that this is a creature you do not confront. You do not hunt it. You run from it, and this land was full of things to run from. For every giant herbivore, there was a giant predator, evolved specifically to hunt it. The paleo pioneers were not just the new apex predator. They were also, for the first time in their ancestral memory, prey. The most iconic killer was Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat. It was not a lion, and it did not hunt like one. It was a heavily muscled ambush predator, built more like a bulldog bear with a short, powerful tail and a thick, muscular neck. It hunted by tackling its prey and then, in a terrifying display of precision, using its 9-inch blade-like canines not to bite, but to stab deep into the throat, severing the windpipe and arteries in a single, fatal puncture. For a human, Smilodon was the silent death, the sudden, bone-breaking impact from a shadow. But there was another predator that was, in many ways, worse. It was a creature of the open plains, and it was a creature of nightmares. Arctidus simus, the giant short-faced bear. This was the largest mammalian land carnivore of the Ice Age. Standing 6 feet at the shoulder on all fours and rearing up to 12 feet, it was a monster of bone-crushing power. But its most terrifying feature was its legs. Unlike the bears of the Old World or the modern grizzly, the short-faced bear had long, slender limbs. It was built not for ambling, but for running. It could run down the Pleistocene horses. It could run down anything. A human could not outrun it. A human could not climb a tree to escape it. To be caught in the open by Arctidus was a death sentence. And then there were the packs. The dire wolves, Canis dirus, were everywhere. They were not simply larger wolves. They were heavier, broader-chested, with a more powerful bite, designed for grappling with and holding on to struggling prey. They moved in large, intelligent packs, and they were a constant, circling, probing threat. They were the snatchers of children who strayed too far, the stalkers of the lone hunter, the hungry mouths that waited just beyond the ring of firelight. How did these small bands of soft-skinned, slow-running humans survive in this land of giants? They survived because they possessed 3 things that no other creature did. First, they had the atlatl. This spear thrower was the great equalizer. It was a force multiplier that allowed a human to kill from a distance. A hunter did not have to get close enough to be gored by a tusk or slashed by a claw. From 30 yards, he could drive a fluted point deep into the lungs of a giant. It was a technology of courage, but also of calculation. Second, they had the group. A lone human was a meal. A group of 10 humans was a strategic, lethal entity. They were a pack that could think. They could coordinate, set traps, create diversions, and defend each other. They could form a porcupine of spears, a bristling, unassailable defense that even a short-faced bear might be wary of confronting. They could use noise and numbers to steal a carcass from a pack of dire wolves. Their strength was not in their individual bodies, but in their collective mind. And third, they had fire. Fire was their ultimate shield. It was the red flower that all animals, even the giants, instinctively feared. A ring of fires around a camp was a magical protective wall. It was the one place they were safe, the one place they could sleep, tend to their wounded, and protect their children. It was the weapon they used to drive herds of bison over cliffs, a tool of mass hunting. It was their light in the darkness and their power. So the confrontation began. It was a clash of evolutionary strategies. On one side, millions of years of evolution had produced size, strength, armor, and saber teeth. On the other side, a different evolutionary path had produced a large brain, a grasping hand, and a social bond. For a few thousand golden, terrible years, these two worlds coexisted. The paleo-pioneers hunted the giants, and the giants hunted them. They lived in a state of high-stakes, perpetual confrontation. They etched the mammoths and mastodons into their memories and perhaps onto stone, creating the first American art. They learned the ways of the dire wolf, the smilodon, and the great bear. They were survivors carving out their niche. A small, warm-blooded, intelligent space in a world ruled by titans. They did not know that their very presence, their intelligence, their fire, and their relentlessly efficient hunting was the beginning of the end. They were the new unbalancing force, and in their confrontation with this land of giants, they were, unknowingly, about to bring that land to a close forever. The Great Dispersal. From the Rockies to the Atlantic, they had come from a world of ice, a lost continent of wind and tundra. They had survived the gauntlet, whether by a high-stakes coastal paddle or a grim trek through a sterile ice-walled corridor. They had confronted and learned to hunt the giants of a new land. Now standing at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, on the vast open plains of a world untouched by human hands, they stood on the threshold of the greatest land rush in human history. This was North America 14,000 years ago. It was an empty stage, a silent continent. From where they stood, a band of perhaps 50 people. The land rolled out in every direction. A 4,000-mile expanse of grassland, forest, mountain, and desert, with no one to claim it. No fences, no borders, no rival tribes. For a hunter-gatherer, this was not just a new land. It was a paradise. This is the story of the Great Dispersal, the human blitzkrieg, a population explosion and migration so fast, it stands as one of the most remarkable achievements of our species. It was the populating of a continent, a sprint from the Rockies to the Atlantic in as little as 1,000 years, a mere 40 or 50 generations. It was a wave of humanity, surfing a wave of protein, flowing like water into every empty niche of a new world. The engine of this dispersal was food, and the fuel was the megafauna. The first peoples, the Clovis hunters and their contemporaries, were big game specialists. They had honed their skills on the mammoths and giant bison of the plains. Their entire culture, their stone technology, their social structure, their spiritual beliefs was built around the hunt. And this new continent was a walking larder. The first wave of the dispersal was a leapfrog across the plains. Let us imagine a band, the children of the spear led by a hunter named Tarek. His grandfather had been born in the ice corridor. Tarek was born on the plains, and for him, this endless grass was the entire world. His band follows a herd of bison and tiquis, and life is good. The hunting is easy. The animals are naive, having never seen a human predator before. They are not wary. A single kill feeds the band for a week. With so much protein and fat, the population thrives. Death rates are low and birth rates are high. Tarek's band, which was 50 people, is now 70. It's getting crowded. The game in their valley, once so plentiful, is becoming a little harder to find. The herds are growing wiser. A younger hunter, Tarek's son Kor, feels the itch. He looks east, to a line of hills he has never climbed. He and his new partner, Asha, and 3 other young families decide to see what is on the other side. They say their farewells and they walk east. What they find after a 2-day walk is a new valley, a new river, and in it a new herd of bison that has never seen a human. The hunting is easy again. Paradise is reclaimed. This process, this budding of a new group from the old, this leapfrogging from one resource-rich valley to the next, is the mechanism of the Great Dispersal. Each generation, the frontier is pushed another 100 miles east. This wave of hunters moves with stunning speed across the Great Plains, a horizontal world perfectly suited to their lifestyle. They cross the Missouri, the Big Muddy. They reach the Mississippi, the father of waters, a river a mile wide. They build rafts of logs lashed with sinew or hide-covered boats, and they cross it. They are unstoppable. But on the other side of the great river, the world changes. The endless grass gives way to trees. At first, it's open parkland, a mix of prairie and groves of oak. But the further east they go, the denser the trees become. They are entering the great eastern woodlands, a forest unlike anything they have ever known. It is a solid, unbroken canopy of oak, chestnut, hickory, and pine, stretching for 1,000 miles all the way to the other ocean. The world becomes vertical. The sky, once a great open bowl, is now a distant filigree, glimpsed through a ceiling of leaves. The acoustics change. The wind doesn't roar, it whispers. The sound of a mammoth's footstep, which could be felt from a mile away, is gone, replaced by the rustle of a white-tailed deer in the undergrowth. For the people of the dispersal, this is the great fork in the road. Some, the true plain specialists, turn south, following the grassland corridor as it sweeps down toward the Gulf of Mexico. They continue their way of life, hunting mammoth and bison, adapting to the heat and humidity of what is now Texas and Florida. But others, like Kor's descendants, push east into the forest. They are forced to adapt or die. Their entire way of life must be reinvented. A giant mammoth is useless in a dense forest. It cannot be effectively hunted, and it doesn't live there anyway. The new prey is the white-tailed deer, fast, silent, and solitary. It is a creature of shadows. The hunters must become shadows themselves. Their hunting techniques change from open plains pursuit to silent, patient stalking. The forest is also home to the mastodon, the mammoth's forest-dwelling cousin. The hunters adapt their skills, learning to trap the great tusked browsers in bogs and kettle ponds. They hunt the black bear, the elk, and the giant moose in the north. Their toolkit changes. The large, heavy Clovis point, designed to punch through a half-inch of mammoth hide, is too large for a deer. New, smaller, and more varied projectile point forms emerge. But more importantly, a new tool becomes critical: the stone axe. To live in the woods, you must learn to master wood. They chop down saplings for shelters, they carve wooden traps, and they hollow out logs to make the first dugout canoes. They become a new people. They are no longer just hunters, they are foragers. The women, who had been specialists in processing meat and hides, become the primary providers. They learn the staggering abundance of the forest floor. they discover the great mast crops of autumn. The acorns, the hickory nuts, the chestnuts. These are calories that don't run away. They can be harvested, processed, and stored for the winter. They learn the rivers. The eastern woodlands are a web of rivers, the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Susquehanna. Using their new canoes, they travel these water highways. They learn to harvest the massive schools of fish, the sturgeon, and the beds of freshwater mussels. The dispersal, which had been a sprint across the plains, now slows. It becomes a more thorough, detailed settling in. But it never stops. The continent is still empty. The budding process continues, but now it follows the river valleys. One group settles a river junction. A generation later, their children take a canoe and paddle 100 miles upstream to found a new camp. Let us follow one, a young woman named Alara. She is the 5th-generation granddaughter of Kor, who was the first to enter the forest. She has never seen a mammoth. She has never seen the open plains. Her people are the people of the river. She is born in a valley in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains. Her entire life is the forest and the river. She too feels the call. She and her group push east, up and over the mountain ridges, a barrier that, while not as formidable as the ice, is a new and challenging world. They follow a river down the other side. One day the air changes. For a month, Alara has smelled a new, sharp, clean scent on the wind. The forest begins to thin. The trees become stunted, wind-blown pines. The ground becomes sandy. And then one afternoon she walks out of the trees and stops, her heart pounding. Before her is a force, a thing she has no name for. It is a body of water, but it is not a river. It is not a lake. It stretches to the horizon. A vast, heaving, pounding expanse of blue-gray. The noise is a deafening, constant roar. She walks to its edge and a wave surges, washing over her feet. She tastes the water. It is salt. She is the first human in her lineage, in her world, to see the Atlantic Ocean. Her people, who began their journey in Siberia, who crossed the lost continent of Beringia, who survived the ice and who hunted the giants, have done it. They have crossed the New World. They have walked and paddled from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The great dispersal is over. The continent is no longer empty. From the frozen Arctic to the new warm sands of the eastern shore, from the Rockies to the Atlantic, the land is now filled with people. The first and fastest chapter of the American story is closed. The long, complex 12,000-year story of living in this land is about to begin. The genetic footprint, a 15,000-year-old legacy. Our story so far has been told in stone and soil and in the shadows of giants. It has been pieced together from the fluted edge of a Clovis point, the preserved wooden huts of a Chilean bog, the faint outline of a child's footprint in a dried-up lake bed, and the echoes of a world lost beneath the waves. But the most powerful, most intimate, and most conclusive chapter of this 15,000-year-old odyssey is not buried in the earth. It is alive. It is written in the blood, the cells, and the very essence of every indigenous person from the shores of the Arctic to the tip of Tierra del Fuego. This is the genetic footprint, a living, breathing, and undeniable history, a legacy passed down from mother to child, generation after generation, a biological map that allows us to retrace the steps of the paleo pioneers with breathtaking precision. For decades, the story of the first Americans was a bitter controversy, a battle of theories. But in the 21st century, the science of genetics has become the great arbiter, the decoder of our deep past. And the story it tells is not simple, but it is profound. It begins, as we suspected, in Siberia. The genetic signature of all Native Americans, North and South, points unequivocally to an ancestral homeland in Northeast Asia. By comparing the DNA of modern indigenous peoples with populations around the world, A clear line is drawn back to the same region where the mammoths and woolly rhinos once roamed. This is the starting block, but genetics immediately revealed a twist, a strange anomaly that archaeology alone could not solve. The DNA of the first Americans is not identical to that of modern Siberians. It's related but distinct, like a cousin, not a sibling. This discovery was the first clue, the first genetic breadcrumb, that led scientists to a revolutionary idea: the Beringian standstill. Genetics has a molecular clock. DNA mutates at a roughly predictable rate over time. By comparing the mutations in two separated populations, we can estimate how long they have been apart. When scientists applied this clock, they found something stunning. The ancestors of the first Americans split from their Siberian parent population, but they did not immediately enter the Americas. Instead, they were in isolation for thousands of years, long enough to accumulate their own unique set of genetic mutations, a signature found nowhere else on Earth. This is the genetic proof of the lost continent. This is the legacy of the Beringians. For 5,000 to 10,000 years, they were a people in limbo, trapped in their ice-free refuge, cut off from Asia by glaciers and cut off from America by the great ice walls. In this cold, windswept homeland, they became genetically a new people. Every single indigenous person in the Americas carries the markers of this Beringian incubation. And then, the genetic data shows a second dramatic event. From this single isolated founding population, a great split occurs. This is the genetic explosion that populated the New World. The data is clear. The peopling of the Americas was not one single event, but a complex series of migrations. The first split is the most profound. It is the two-path mystery solved. The genetic evidence shows a clear, deep divergence between two major groups, today identified as Northern Native Americans, including Athabascan and Dini-speaking peoples, and Southern Native Americans, Huron, who populated the rest of North and all of South America. The southern branch is the older of the two. Their genetics show they split off first, and their path of dispersal was rapid, linear, and coastal. This is the genetic footprint of the kelp highway. These were the paddlers, the children of the kelp. Their DNA flows like a river down the Pacific coast. With genetic diversity dropping off the further south you go, a classic signature of a leapfrog coastal migration. These are the people whose descendants built Monteverde in Chile 14,500 years ago. The northern branch split off from the Beringian population later. Their genetic signature aligns with a different migration, one that fits the timing of the ice-free corridor. These are the walkers, the children of the spear, who would emerge onto the plains and perhaps give rise to the Clovis culture. The DNA proves it. The paddlers came first, then the walkers. But the most powerful evidence of all comes not from the living, but from the dead. The science of ancient DNA, aDNA, has allowed us to reach back in time and read the genetic code of the paleo pioneers themselves. In 1968, a 12,600-year-old skeleton of a 1-year-old boy was found in Montana, buried with the distinctive fluted points and ochre-covered tools of the Clovis culture. For decades, he was just an archaeological find. In 2014, scientists were able to sequence his genome. This child, named Anzac I by the local tribes, was a ghost from our story. His DNA was a revelation. It single-handedly debunked decades of fringe theories that the Clovis people were a mysterious, unrelated race from Europe, the Solutrean hypothesis. The Anzac child's genome was unequivocally Native American. He was a direct ancestor to many, if not all, modern indigenous peoples in Central and South America, and closely related to all tribes in North America. He was the children of the spear, and his genes were the southern branch. He was the living link, the 12,600-year-old proof that the Clovis hunters were, indeed, the first Americans of the interior, and that their legacy continues. This genetic legacy has also become a powerful tool for justice and identity. For decades, a 9,000-year-old skeleton known as the Kennewick Man, or the Ancient One, was the subject of a bitter legal battle. Early anatomical studies suggested he was different, perhaps not related to modern tribes. But in 2015, his DNA was sequenced. The genetic footprint was undeniable. He was more closely related to the modern Colville tribe, who had claimed him as their ancestor all along, than to any other population on Earth. The 9,000-year-old legacy was confirmed. The Ancient One was returned to his people and reburied. The genetic footprint is the ultimate story. It is a story of a homeland in Siberia. It is a story of a 10,000-year isolation in a lost, drowned continent called Beringia. It is a story of a great schism, a branching of two paths, one of water, one of land, one of paddlers, one of walkers. It is the story of the Anzac child, a hunter's son, whose DNA is a direct link to the people of the plains. This 15,000-year-old legacy is not just a scientific curiosity. It is the story of the first peoples. It is an unbroken thread that stretches from the Ice Age to the present day. A biological testament to one of the greatest journeys in human history. The giants they hunted are gone. The ice has retreated. The very continent they crossed has drowned. But the footprint remains.